بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا، فإنه حق من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. الله وحده لا شريك له، المنان، بديع السماوات والأرض، ذو الجلال والإكرام، الحي القيوم، الله السلام ومنه السلام، تبارك ذا الجلال والإكرام. I start in the name of Allah. Allah, the anchor of meaning in this world. The anchor of meaning and the anchor of value, and the teacher of mercy and love and compassion and beneficence. The teacher of all that is good and all that is light and all that is pure in our existence. And I pray for peace and blessings upon the final prophet, Muhammad ﷺ, the last of the Abrahamic line of prophets. Peace and blessings be upon all of them through the centuries, who came to this world as educators and moral leaders to affirm in us, to affirm in humanity the accounts of justice and the value of worth and the value of accountability and the value of meaning and purpose, and indeed the value of life itself. Subhanallah, Subhanallah, that so much of our faith and so much of, from the very beginning of the saga of the prophets of Allah, the prophets of God, to our very day, one prophet after another, they would teach the moral lesson of meaning. By meaning, I mean that we are not the result of a coincidence, and we are not the result of some accident. That from the moment of the inception of creation, there is an intentionality for our existence. We exist, each of us on this earth exists because of a divine intent for us to exist. We are not the result of some accident, and we are not the result of some coincidence or happenstance. Human beings often forget the monumental importance of that. If we are on this earth by happenstance or coincidence, if we exist because of a mere accident, then it is not a stretch to start believing that some of us are worth more than others, that some of us have a right to exist more than others, or that some of us have a right to happiness more than others. If we are the result of mere coincidence, then by the very logic of coincidence, if coincidence is the teacher of morality, if coincidence is the teacher of ethics, if coincidence leads us to a conclusion of right and wrong, then coincidence also makes some people rich and some people poor, and those that are born through coincidence into wealth easily assume that luck has favored them. And because luck has favored them, they give themselves more value over other human beings. And we end up with the type of imbalances that we see all around us. The population of a country like England can exploit and in fact consume the populations of many countries around the world just so the British clan can live and thrive. The population of a country like France can dominate and consume and indeed often destroy the entire population of Africa just so those who are born privileged by virtue of a gender or a race or an ethnicity or a nationality can thrive at the expense of those who are forgotten by history. The lesson from the very first prophet of Allah, from the Prophet Ibrahim a.s. to our last prophet Muhammad, the lesson of the prophets, if you study them and reflect upon them, is that there is no coincidence and there is no accident. That everything created has a creator. The only time that logic is suspended is when we talk about the first cause of things. The first cause of things. Because the first cause does not abide by the logic of causality. We can't make that type of assumption. The logic of causality doesn't exist with the first cause, but it exists as a result of the first cause. Even those who don't believe in God ultimately throw their hands up at the first cause. Even those who don't believe in God believe that at some point, somewhere, somehow, things like methane gas, things like carbon dioxide, things like dirt, the raw material for stars, came to be. But when you ask them, well, how did it come to be? There is no answer. They say, well, it just did. But when you tell them the same logic about God, well, God just is, and we don't know where God came from. They say, well, we can't know, that we can't accept. It's a severe logical flaw. Nevertheless, if God exists, then from the first prophet, Ibrahim alayhi salam, to Muhammad alayhi salam, have taught is that there is a reason for the creation of human beings. And that reason is not necessarily a justification. So it could be that only God knows perfectly why a particular individual was created. But what you cannot deny is that God chose for every human being on the face of this earth, Muslim and non-Muslim, to exist. And that not only that, but that Allah, for every human being, has created an entire, let's use the word, bureaucracy or institution for accountability. For every human being, there is a qareen, or a jinn type creature that is the negative face of the positive energy, if you will. Like for every matter, there's dark matter. They are the other side. And for that, there is also, for every human being, angels that record your deeds and record your life meticulously. You are never alone. Add to that Allah is always present with you. Every human being on the face of this earth is so important. And that is why Allah tells us that if you kill one human being, it's as if you've killed all of humanity. Or you save one human being, it's as if you've saved all of humanity. Because it defies the logic. It defies the order of divinity for you to destroy God's creation, even if it's just the murder of a single human being. You've negated divinity by murdering one human being. And you've affirmed divinity in saving one human being. But the lessons of the divine and the Abrahamic prophets don't stop here. Think of every prophet that Allah has sent, and think of what secretive, powerful element allowed the prophet to build a community that educates the world. If I ask you to define the element, you could say, well, every prophet had Iman. But Iman can exist individually. It's not what created the community that enabled the prophet, any of the prophets, to leave their mark on this world. The secret, powerful agent or element for every single prophet, time and time, whether it is called brotherhood or sisterhood in some of the divine texts, what it is in its nature and truth is love. Witness the number of stories that manifest the intensity of love between the Prophet Ibrahim ﷺ and his disciples and his family, his wives and his children and his disciples. Witness the number of narratives, whether in the Quran or the Old Testament, that talk about the love that existed between the Prophet Musa and his brother Harun and the people of Israel. Go back and read the stories that talk about the love that Jesus had for his students and his disciples, and for his people, and his passionate desire to see his people reform their ways out of love, out of care, out of passion. Those who want to understand the fundamental relationship that mark the entire legacy of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in Mecca and Medina will find the secret gel and bond of love between Muhammad and his people. Whether the Muhajirun, the Ansar, or even later on the Meccans that he forgives and embraces so lovingly, although they lived a lifetime fighting him. This is why one among dozens of traditions, the Prophet ﷺ reminds us that there are those who will come in the final day. There will come in the hereafter people who are blessed with luminosity, purity. Who are these? The answer is very simple. Al-mutahabbuna fillah. Those who love one another, not because they're attracted to one another's personality, not because they find it advantageous to like one another, not because circumstances created a family bond between them or whatnot, but because they love one another for the sake of Allah. Now, modern Muslims often think that for the sake of Allah means that I love you according to some formula found in the Sunnah, the tradition of the Prophet ﷺ. But in fact, no. It's that fundamental decency, fundamental trait of character that makes you understand the worth of a human being as God's creature, that makes you understand that every human being on the face of this earth has a reason and a purpose, and that you have a reason and a purpose, and that if you respect Allah, you will respect Allah's creation, and that if you love Allah, you will love Allah's creation. Why are we so wedded to reading the tradition in exactly the same ways over and over and over, when interpretations that are true to the spirit of not just the prophecy of Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, but all the prophets of Allah, all the prophets of Allah came to say, people, don't waste your life worshipping mythologies. Don't let those who pretend to know the divine will exploit you and demand sacrifices and suck your blood. Don't accept the mythology that some of you are a low caste and others of you are high caste. Don't believe that some of you exist because Allah have made you chosen people, and others are not chosen. Go back and read the prophecy of the prophets But this time, read them in relation to one another. And you'll find the message is always the same. You are here because Allah chose for you to be here. You are here because God has a purpose and an intentionality. And that whether you understand this intentionality or purpose or not, you are worth so much that even the heavens take record of you. The heavens follow everything you do, day by day, minute by minute. Every human being, when you kill a human being, you've committed an offense against the heavens, against Allah, because now it's as if you've exercised your will over and above God's intent and objective in saying this human being will exist. When you act like certain human beings are worth more than others. So, why is it that we live in a world where millions can be exterminated in a genocide in Rwanda, and the world reacts very slowly? When millions were exterminated in a genocide in the Congo, and because it's Africa, it took the world forever to come to something called the Lusaka Agreement to stop the bloodshed. Why is it that we exist in a world where NATO took affirmative action in Kosovo only because Kosovo is in the heart of Europe and the victims were white? Meanwhile, there is an ongoing genocide in Yemen, and the world half-heartedly does something. Ongoing genocide in Libya, and the world contributes to the chaos. It's an opportunity to sell weapons and to get rich. Leave alone the horrendous genocide in Syria. Why is it that when Eastern Europe overthrew despotism and wanted to build democratic states, whites, meaning Europe and the US and Canada, helped Eastern Europe democratize and continue to help? And when dark-skinned people aspire to build democracies, the world looked to profit first before anything else. And if democracy did not yield profits, we did not help any dark-skinned country build a democracy. We often, especially when it came to the Muslim world, we threw all types of obstacles in their paths. The way we support the Haftar in Libya is proof enough for you. Haftar is a completely American invention. A man who was brought after he fell captive, a Libyan military general who was captured in Chad. The CIA interfered with Chad, told him, give us Haftar. He lived in the United States at the expense of our intelligence agencies for 20 years. And then when it became time to overthrow the democratically elected government in Libya, the government of Wifaq, we've unleashed Haftar on them. And we fund Haftar. And France funds Haftar. And the Emirates funds Haftar. And Egypt supports Haftar. And Saudi funds Haftar. If you don't understand as a Muslim, that the reason for Islam, the purpose for Islam, is to rebel, like the purpose for the prophecy of Abraham and Moses and Jesus, is to rebel against classism and racism and elitism and unfair institutions of human society, then for me, you as are far removed from Islam as humanly possible. Then your relations to Islam are tenuous at best. It's not your salah, it's not your soul, it is what is in your heart as iman. Do you look at the world and do you look at every human being and you say, MashaAllah, I know you exist because Allah decided for you to exist. And as someone who believes and loves Allah, I believe and love you. I believe in you and love you. Simply because I believe and love Allah. That's tahabbu fillah. That's tahabbu fillah. Love one another in Allah, in God. One of the most heartbreaking things among modern Muslims is that, in my view, that innate understanding about the worth of the created in light of the Creator was intuitive. Because when I look at our past scholars before the modern age, and I look at their ethics within the context of their historical moment, I don't judge them by the standards of my age. I judge them by the standards of their age. And when I look at the epistemological framework of their age, a fancy word to mean the system of knowledge of their time, I find that they cared. They cared because they understood that they lived in something that belongs to Allah and must be honored by Allah, per Allah. That they cared about animals, they cared about the trees, they cared about the rivers, their cared about the heavens, they cared about the mountains. Read Al-Aqd al-Farid. Read how much poetry are about valuing nature, loving animals, and loving human beings. And that's not even a Sufi. We're not even talking about a Sufi. But modern Muslims seem to think that their Islam is about primarily ritual. And the ritual is an objective in and of itself. Modern Muslims seem to think that you can claim to love Allah but be neutral about what Allah created, or not care who suffers and who lives and who dies. This translates in a concrete way for me in the field of human rights. I've said it before and I say it again. The reason I care about human rights, and I say this among all the human rights activists that I have met and worked with, I tell them the reason I care so much about human rights is because I'm a Muslim. They look at me and smile as if I am saying something just to sound smart, or I'm giving them dogma. I don't blame them, because that's not what they're accustomed to from Muslims. That's not what they're used to from Muslims. Just because a wrong belief or a wrong system or a wrong practice has become widespread will never make it right. And this basic theological premise that I'm talking about is the heart and core of Islam, the Islam of Muhammad alayhi salam, and the Islam all the way to Ibrahim alayhi salam. Tahabbu fillah. Love everything through God, by God, for God. قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم صلى الله عليه وسلم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وعلى من تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Recently, a friend that has been a friend for a long time, a friend of the family. A family that is an observant, practicing, good Muslim family that has lived in the United States, I don't know, for a long time. Told me about something that affected me deeply, perhaps because of how close it is to my family. One of their children met a missionary group, and the missionary group convinced that child to convert to Christianity. But in the conversion to Christianity, the missionary group did not sell the theology as a pristine, abstract idea to believe in, but sold Christianity through an extensive dosage of Islamophobia. In other words, look how horrible Islam is. Since Islam is so horrible, come to Jesus who loves you. The part that hurt is not just the Islamophobia, but that the reason this child converted is because this child found among that Christian missionary group a group that gave that child plenty of hugs, plenty of loving. While in Islamic centers, they go in and they find coldness and lack of passion and lack of warmth. They find the Imam far more concerned about lowering His Majesty's gaze than about your feelings. The Imam won't look at a woman. Won't even look at a woman when he's talking to a woman. We'll find people insisting on women being limited to their space in the center instead of women praying alongside men as their equals. We'll find a huge deal whether a woman can speak in Islamic center or not. We'll find that when they pray, 10 eyes by fellow women are on her, on whether her hijab is on right or wrong, or what, whether her hair is showing or not. When the parents of this child say, the reason my daughter became Christian is not because of anything particularly in Christian theology, but because the experience with Islamic centers, and even to be more specific, in Southern California, so we don't say the US, Southern California, was alienating to an intelligent, smart, respectable American Muslim woman growing in these centers, growing up in these centers. There is no question if a person finds that, let me restate this. I respect a person's belief, whether it is with Islam or with some other faith. That is something that I respect. But what hurts is the way we fail our youth. Personally, and maybe it's because I'm a lawyer, I don't know, but personally, I don't think we can convince our youth that we truly understand the value of human dignity if we don't at the same time treat our youth with dignity. And treat our youth with dignity doesn't come through pretending to respect them, because they're very smart. They're going to pick up on the fact whether you don't respect them or you don't respect them. Whether you think just because you know Quran and Sunnah you are somehow higher than them, or you treat them as an equal. They pick up on that. Every imam acts like they're God's gift to earth. They're always looking high, looking up high. Most imams won't even shake hands with a woman. We failed this girl and so many others. We failed them. When the most educated and the most accomplished among us in our communities, we chase them away, we don't attract them. You are smart, you're educated, you're talented, we don't want you. What do you expect? But what are you going to tell Allah? I don't know. I'm sure that the imam of that place where this girl grew up, it doesn't even occur to him that Allah will come and say, you are responsible for the various ways you've alienated this girl. But that's the truth. We don't teach the fact that Islam was the religion of the Prophet Ibrahim, and Islam is the religion of all the prophets. And what it means is tahabu fillah. Love one another for Allah and through Allah. And we don't even have to say Allah, it's God. Ilahuna wa ilahukum wahid. Our God and your God is one. And it's not fake love. It's not fake love. It's a love that comes from giving every human being their worth and dignity. Worth and dignity. And we have an expression in the modern world that describes the worth and dignity of human beings. 2 words. Human rights. You You cannot pretend to be a good Muslim in this day and age if you don't respect human rights. If human rights is not a core part of your theology and iman, then there's no hope. I'll give you one final example. All of you know that the death of Muhammad Mursi, and again, it's not the issue of Muhammad Mursi, it's the violation of the human rights of this human being until he died in an Egyptian prison, caused the rift between me and the Islamic Center of Southern California, and caused the Islamic Center of Southern California to blacklist me. Recently, the UN rapporteur, Calamari, issued a report. She's a special reporter on extrajudicial killings for the UN. Issued a report about the murder of Muhammad Mursi through negligence and intent. And read the report. The thing that kills me is that all the discussions about the importance of a human rights report like that comes through and by non-Muslims. Even when the report came out, those same Egyptians that insisted on censorship in the Islamic Center of Southern California never cared about the report, never played a role, never even read it, didn't even think of an apology. Recently, another report came out by Amnesty this time about extensive human rights violations, including the life of a woman called Aisha Shater, who has a rare disease that caused her to constantly bleed. And Amnesty is warning and calling upon the world to pay attention to the plight of this poor woman in Egyptian prisons who is on the verge of tortuous death. Again, all the people who care about what happens to Aisha Shater are not Muslim. In the midst of the bloodshed that we see in Libya, the murder of children and civilians, the Emirat supports Haftar, who bombs civilians, and not only that, but even plays a role in modern day slavery by capturing and selling people, his officers, where the International Criminal Court even indict one of Haftar's officers, called Abou El Fadl, who's actually supposed to be surrendered to the International Criminal Court, and Haftar refuses to surrender him. And the slaughter that Saudi Arabia and the Yemen and Egypt and Sudan are sponsoring in Yemen, we have Hamza Yusuf come up and give a public lecture where he thanks Yemen for its great leadership of the Muslim world and great act of tolerance and teaching Muslim tolerance.
So,
Sorry, yeah, UAE. And praising the Emirat, despite the slaughter in Yemen, and despite the slaughter in Libya, and despite the slaughter in so many other places in Africa. I could go on. Let's not even start talking about the Uyghur Muslims of East Turkestan and the way we have failed them. 3 million people suffering daily, and Muslims are absent. You cannot claim to be a good Muslim if you don't care about human rights issues. Human rights is the modern epistemology for saying I respect the dignity and worth of every human being, and I respect the dignity of worth of every human being because I respect Allah's creation, And not just respect Allah's creation, but because I love Allah, I love Allah's creation. This is the faith. This is what Islam is about. Even if it is that I am the only, even if it happens or it transpires that one day comes where I am the only one articulating this message, I know it to be the truth. I know it that that's what all these books taught me through an entire life spent reading the Islamic tradition. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله ولكم إني داع فأمن. اللهم اعف عنا، اللهم ارحمنا، اللهم اغفر لنا، اللهم اهدنا لأقرب منهاج رشدا واصلح حالنا يا رب العالمين. Allah forgive our sins, guide us and help us so we could become better Muslims. Show us the light of the beauty of your light and grant us the favor of anchoring the beauty of your light in our hearts and our intellects. Allah.